Well, welcome once again to our Elevenses service. You get the joy once again of listening to me. This is our next instalment of people who've been called by Jesus, and hopefully, as we go through each of the different topics, you'll see some synergies, maybe with your own lives, and maybe some challenges, and maybe some useful, encouraging thoughts. So today, the character that we're going to study is Zacchaeus. Okay, Zacchaeus, various different expressions for it. And I've put a little paraphrase at the bottom, the other man that nobody liked. Lots of the characters we've studied so far are people that weren't liked by anybody around. So you might not see synergies in your own life with those, because hopefully everybody likes you. But we will eventually get on to some people that people did like, I think, as well. So this is another man that nobody liked. Now, it's a fairly well-known sort. And we're going to start off, a little week prior to that, Tom was talking about this topic. And the person in question this time was a rich young man. So a rich young man that had approached Jesus. And he said, look, I've always followed everything that you've asked me to do. I've always done all the things that God has said you should do. What else do I need to do to be saved? And Jesus said to him, well, it's quite simple. Just sell all your belongings and you'll be saved. And the rich young man kind of took that a little bit harshly. He couldn't give up those things of this world, and he didn't quite grasp. Now, I don't think it was actually about the giving up of things. That wasn't really the moral of the story, right, in that sense. But it was about the fact that he needed to follow wholeheartedly what Jesus wanted. Now, these are some of the points that Tom brought out in the talk. So don't ask Jesus to endorse you, let him change you. The person that approached Jesus, he was actually asking for him to say, yeah, everything you've done is excellent. Jesus wants to work with you, he wants to change you, and he will do the work, not you. It's not about what he can do, it's about what we can do, it's what God can do for us. Don't become captive to your wealth. The things of this world are kind of slightly temporal. There's nothing wrong with having wealth, don't get that wrong, that's not what I'm saying. I want to make that point today, because another person we're talking about, Zacchaeus, he had a lot of money as well, so we're not saying that's a bad thing, right? But don't become captivated by it. And give up what you cannot keep to gain what you cannot lose. I suppose that's the eternal perspective. So that's where we've come from. And today's story, as I've said, is about Zacchaeus. The setting for our story is in a place called Jericho. We'll do a little bit of a history behind Jericho. On the map, this is Google Satellite. I did this specifically, and I'll explain that in a second why it's like this. It's just outside Jerusalem. There's a fair distance between the two, and so north and sea. But when you actually start to look in at it in a little bit more detail, it looks like quite an arid, kind of dry sort of location. But Jericho is quite an outstanding place to be. You'd think, looking at it, right, there's no other population really near it. It's a fair distance from Jerusalem. You have to walk out to it and it sits in the Jordan Valley. So in terms of just a few facts of it, it's one of the oldest inhabited town cities that people think exist. So there's something in the order of 20 successive settlements that have been uncovered through archaeological digs back sort of 10,000 years sort of time, they think. So it's one of the oldest. It's known as the City of Palms, and it's because of these copious springs of water. So it sits in this awfully arid kind of environment, but it's a real kind of standout oasis. It sits 258 meters below sea level, right? Because of that, it gets fabulous temperate climate. It gets a lovely warm environment, but it's lovely and low. It's got all of this water supply. So as you can imagine, historically, it's always been a great place for growing crops, and that's why Jericho as a place became very vibrant and has been over many years. Now you say, well, that's very interesting, but it does set the scene for where we're going today, because the person that we're going to talk about, Zacchaeus, he was the chief tax collector for that region. Okay, so his job was to collect the taxes, and we'll get on to that. Now, does anybody know who this person is? Oh, he's got a very funny name, I found, ironically funny in the end. Okay, You rubbish. Failed quiz. This guy's name is Carlos Slim. Alright? Alright? Which is why I thought his name was quite ironically funny. He is the world's richest man at the moment. Okay? So he has just trumped once again Bill Gates. So they oscillated back and forth last year with plus or minus 10 billion. So he is currently the world's richest man, and he's a tycoon. Now Zacchaeus was also a very rich man, okay? And as he lived in this place of Jericho, it was one of the world's major civilizations. And that's what drew people to it, out into that arid place, this little oasis. Now, who's this one? It's vastly easier to come along. Right, so Daniel Radcliffe, he's 5'5.25 inches tall. He's very short. Well, I say very short. Everybody's going to criticize me soon. My wife's 5'6". But relatively, right? He's short for a guy. Zacchaeus was a very short man. Okay. And the final one, I've told you the answer to this already. He is the chief tax collector. The challenge for you: anybody guess how much this man collects in tax for the UK every year? In billions of pounds, please. Any guesses? How much so? Low. Yeah, all inclusive. All right, okay, you failed. Rubbish. 550.6 billion is what they collected in 2012. So you contributed to that. Thank you, everybody, for paying towards in the due cause. So the main point, I know this is a little bit jovial, but Zacchaeus was a very rich man of his time. He was the chief tax collector, not just for Jericho, but for the whole region. He was a very short man, and he was a person that, because of his status, even though he was wealthy, was not liked by anybody in the region. Okay, he stood out. So our story is picked up in Luke. It's a very short story, Luke chapter 19, just a few verses, and I've just brought a few things out. The scene is set. Jesus is on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho. So he's walking out through this desert, arid land. And Zacchaeus has heard that he's coming. People have heard in advance. Zacchaeus has probably also heard about some of these other characters that he's talked to. I think we started off with Matthew, didn't we? A tax collector a number of weeks back. And he's heard about the interaction. He went for dinner with Matthew. He's heard about the fact that he's willing to talk to people who dislike. And Zacchaeus says, I want to go and see this man. So he says he tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. It's a very interesting little story that rather than trying to say, I want to see Jesus, I want to see this man that I'm intrigued about, and try and push to the front of the crowd, which he could have done, he climbed up a tree, right, which is another way of fixing the problem. But it might tell you something about Zacchaeus' character a little bit, that he was not the person necessarily who wants to be bullish and get to the front. He wants to be shy and back and see him from a distance, right? So he didn't want to impose himself, which is a little different to the rich young man that we had a couple of weeks back, okay? This was the person that was bringing everything, saying, look at all the good things I've done. So moving on from that. So he tried to get a look at Jesus. When Jesus came by, this scene is set. Zacchaeus is up in the tree. He should be out of view in these big trees. But he looked up at Zacchaeus. He stopped. He called Zacchaeus and said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Now, Zacchaeus must have been pretty shocked by this. Firstly, he was hiding in a tree, so he hoped not to have been seen, but he was caught. And secondly, he was this tax collector that nobody liked. Maybe that's why he didn't want to be in the crowd. But Jesus has called him down and said, I want to come to dinner with you. So he was outstanded by this, and he just down from this tree. It says he quickly climbs down out of the tree and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. Okay, so he'd heard these wonderful things about Jesus, and he'd had great joy in the fact that this man was going to come to dinner with him. We learn about how the people thought of Zacchaeus here. It says the people were displeased. He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner. They grumbled and they murmured. So it tells us that the people didn't like Zacchaeus. Whether he was or not dishonest, I don't know, right? We assume he was, right, because that was the impression. He was wealthy, all the rest. He might not have been, but the people definitely thought he was, or they disliked him just for being a tax collector, full stop. So Jesus went to have dinner with him. And I don't know what the conversation was. It doesn't really record the conversation that Jesus had with him. You can assume it would have been one of great interest in Zacchaeus. He would have learned very many things. But it doesn't elaborate on what was said. But what we do know is that while Zacchaeus stood before the Lord, he says, I will give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. So whether Jesus had a discussion with him, right, which had made him feel honest about everything, it doesn't get written that way. It's as if Zacchaeus, just his encounter with Jesus is so overwhelming that he becomes super honest. He's changing as a character immediately. And he offers 4 times. There's some verses in the Old Testament that says if you've cheated anybody, you should pay him back a certain amount of money. And 4 times was much, much greater than the law required him to do. So Zacchaeus was going over and above. As I said, I find it interesting that it doesn't record that discussion, because what it says to me is that just simply having a relationship, having an encounter with Jesus can be massively influential in your lives. Jesus had chosen to go to his house. He approached Zacchaeus. As a result, Zacchaeus changed. Very different, a contrast to this rich young man. And Jesus replied back to him and says, salvation has come to this home today. The Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost. I think in the past few weeks we touched on this with Matthew the tax collector, that Jesus didn't generally pick people who weren't in need. He always seemed to go to those who needed healing. He went to those who are desperate for help. And he sees a need in every one of us that he wants to help. He calls us like Zacchaeus and says, I want to help. I want to have a life that's engaged with you. A life where you can grow up. You can have a strong, blessed life through a strong relationship with God. And that's what Jesus wants. Now, pure determination. Zacchaeus would have heard about Jesus and other tax collectors. He was absolutely determined to see him. As I said, his approach was slightly different. He didn't bustle and hustle his way to the front of the crowd. He decided to hide up a tree. But he wasn't going to let the fact that he was short stop him. Right? There might be limitations that you come up in with your own life. I'm not a good enough character at the moment. My lifestyle is not becoming of a Christian. Right? There could be things like that you say, just not now. Not now. I'm not ready. Zacchaeus had issues, right? People hated him. Maybe he was dishonest, right? He was short. He couldn't see. He overcame them, right? When he was called, he changed. He offered 4 times his wealth. As I said, it's not about the moral of the story. It's not about giving your money away. It's not linked to that thing. It's about responding to the call of Jesus, the determination of the chick trying to fly. The other things that come out with an encounter with God, Zacchaeus' life changed in a click of a finger, really. That one day, that one night, it was radical. He'd gone from being this character that was very worldly, wealthy, to somebody who now wanted to follow Jesus. He put stuff in the past behind him and he looked forward to the future, and that's what Jesus opened up for him. The forgiveness was free, overwhelming, and powerful. Okay, he was no longer serving himself, but God and others. As I said, he gave back to them, he gave to the poor. He demonstrated this visibly to others, and that's quite powerful. I think I talked about the example of people maybe feeling they don't have a life that's ready and prepared yet to become a Christian, so I'm not good enough yet. I've had that discussion with people just this weekend, and I think the topic of demonstrating change to others is very important. When people would have looked at Zacchaeus after this day's encounter with Jesus, they would have questioned, what has caused you to be like that? What has caused you to change from the way you used to act to looking like this? And we need to look at our own lives and say, are we visibly different now in a good, positive way because we're Christians? When we go out and socialise with people, am I different? In my work life, do they notice my reaction to things is different? I hope so. I used to be very short-tempered, and I probably still am, slightly. Kerry's looking at me funny. But in that instant reaction you have to things, I sent Kerry a text this week and said, I've been really bad. I was very grumpy with somebody this morning for doing something wrong in work. And she said that was unacceptable. You shouldn't be grumpy with somebody. I said, well, sometimes it is. It's okay. And I got told off. But I think that instant reaction you have sometimes can change because of your desire to serve God. Because you want to act kindly, justly, compassionately to people. And eventually, over time and practice, you will change. And that is powerful in the way it impacts others. What must I do? This was the question. Jesus didn't ask Zacchaeus to give up his wealth. To make that point, he chose to give it back, right? Zacchaeus chose. Jesus didn't say, do this, give everything away. But when he chose to do it, he gave much more generously than was even required of him. As we said, the law required something if you cheated somebody to give back at least what you got. But I think giving 4 times was just evidence of how much change had taken place in his life. So, who do we belong to? The verse says at the end of that passage, Jesus came to seek and to save those who were lost. This means that really, we were God's to start with, right? He's not buying us, all right, as if we were our own. It says he came to seek and save those who were lost. We were his, we were found, and we got lost of our own kind of path. So Jesus is looking to bring us back to the place where we're found, right, which is found with him. We just were in the wrong place, right? And we need to be returned to our rightful owner. That's the whole message of the gospel message of Jesus coming down to this earth, was that Jesus wanted to help you find the right place. And the right place is an encounter with Jesus, a life then that's fulfilled because he works in your life as a result. And it will be life-changing. And hopefully, I think most of us have experienced that. There we go. So, brief summary. What about me? A personal challenge, think about it. Don't let anything stop you seeking God. What's stopping you? What are the things in your life that hinders you from strengthening, maybe, or having a relationship with God? Is it family around you? Is it pressure of work, not enough time in the day? Is it your personal life, your moral attitude to things? Whatever it is, right? What is stopping you? Encounters with God are life-changing. This was just one for Zacchaeus, right? Many people have had them. I know of people who have been on their deathbed effectively through whatever illness. And as a result of fervent prayer to God, they've come out at the other end healed, right? And as a result of that, they have overwhelmingly changed their attitude to life. They've gone on for many years. That's a radical example, right? But encounters with God can be life-changing. And as a result, we should be willing and ready to serve as a result. So are we ready to be changed, and are we willing to be changed? People should notice a difference. We talked about that, just reiterating the point. Do your actions match your beliefs? That's a question we should ask ourselves when we go out. You were lost, but God has found you. Are you ready to walk with him? So the challenge is more in a summary in many ways. Maybe we'll just close with a prayer at that point. Our God, we thank you for the short story of Zacchaeus. He's an interesting short character that we've really can learn quite a little bit from his encounter with Jesus. And our God, we thank you that you show such a radical change in his life as a result of a short encounter with your Son. And we thank you that you've offered to each and every one of us that same opportunity to have a relationship with you through your Son. So God, we'd ask that you'd help each and every one of us to appreciate that, to lay hold of it, and to really cherish the fact that Jesus wants to have us close and to protect us and to look after us. So God, we ask that you'd help us, that our actions would now match those beliefs. So God, we thank you for the story. We ask you to help each and every one of us in Jesus' name. Amen.